Okay, we're on. Okay, today is June 15th in the year 2012. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Steve Levitan here on Stage 5 at Fox. Okay, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We are going to start right from the beginning with, what was your name at birth?
Stephen Elliott Levitan.
When and where were you born?
I was born April 6th, 1962 at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago.
Is that where you grew up, in Chicago?
I grew up in Chicago.
Talk a little bit about your parents, their names and what they did.
My father was born Abraham Levitan, but soon after changed his name to Albert Levitan. And he was a self-employed accountant in Chicago. He spent a lot of his teen years and young life playing saxophone and clarinet in a big band. And then he became an accountant. And my mom grew up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and Dolores Levitan. She was born Dolores Ravitch, and she moved to Chicago as a young single woman and met my father, and she was became an antique dealer for a long time.
Was she working when you were growing up?
Yeah, she had a couple of different antique stores along the way. I spent much of my childhood moving around heavy antiques.
Do you have any sisters or brothers?
I have two older sisters, Jamie McGurk, whose husband works in the entertainment business here in Los Angeles, and sister Shelley Adler, who right now is running for Congress in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Well, did you ever expect that growing up?
Well, she was always very smart in debate and all that. So yeah, it's a logical extension of her life.
What were some of your interests growing up as a kid?
You know, pretty typical. I grew up in Evanston, which is about 2 miles from Northwestern University. And, you know, I had kind of a typical suburban childhood. I played basketball and, you know, a lot of different sports growing up, and watched way too much television. And I don't know, you know, then I got in, you know, as time went on and I got into high school and all that, I became more interested in theater and writing, you know, comic shows and doing things like that. So, you know, those, but very, very typical, you know, childhood.
What kind of TV were you watching as a kid?
Everything. Big on the Dick Van Dyke Show was a huge show for me for some reason. It was on every day, as I recall, on Channel 9, WGN in Chicago. And so I had a giant dose of life as a comedy writer through the eyes of Rob Petrie. And I watched that, and then, you know, I can cite all the really great shows that I watched, which, you know, I did. You know, Saturday night was big for us, you know, the Bob Newhart Show and Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Burnett and all those, and All in the Family was huge growing up for me as a kid. But I also watched Gilligan's Island and The Brady Bunch and, you know, all those shows too.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
You know, this didn't seem possible when you're a kid growing up in suburban Chicago. You don't know anybody who does this, and it doesn't seem real. It seems a million miles away. So while I had an interest in this, because I was fascinated by it, I never even considered it a possibility. For a long time, I wanted to be an architect, because I found the plans for our house and I used to study them and I thought they were fascinating. Then we got a really great aquarium, and so I wanted to be a marine biologist for about 2 weeks. And then I wanted to be, somewhere along the line, I decided I wanted to be a newscaster. And I was for a short period. So that was an interesting, you know, little little side trip on the road here. But yeah, I had a lot of different interests. But everything was kind of, once I got past my marine biologist phase, there was a common thread of everything involved writing in some way, everything involved the media in some way.
Were you writing as a kid?
I don't know if I was writing as a young kid, I mean, more so than I had to. But once I got into high school, I started to do some creative writing and wrote, the assemblies for school. We would do these comic assemblies and put on shows, and I would do those. And I don't know, I always felt comfortable doing it. It felt right to me.
Were you funny as a kid?
I don't know. It's really funny. That's a good question. I don't know if I think I must have had some sort of a dry observation about life, or, but I don't remember. Did I? Yeah, I mean, my friends and I would laugh a lot, but I don't know. That's a really good question.
Was there a lot of humor in your household?
Well, there was a lot of, humor comes from conflict. And there was always a lot of, we were a big screamy, yelly Jewish family that, things were not, I'd have some friends who were, one friend in particular who was not Jewish, and he'd come over to our house and he would just go like, wow, it's loud in here. That was my house. But there were definitely funny moments, and there were my parents were smart, and I think making people laugh was definitely valued. I remember my parents, All in the Family, for example, being a very big deal in our house. They really admired that, and what it was doing in the world, and how it was conveying a message through humor. And so I remember that being very important in our family.
So you were very aware of that.
Yeah.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
Well, my parents are very different. My father, by the way, passed away about 17 or 18 years ago now. And he was older than the typical father at the time. Now he might be slightly more in line with what some people are doing, especially around here. But he had me at 44. So my dad was quiet. And my dad had a tough childhood because he lost 2 brothers to illness, and he idolized them. So my dad he wanted to be a doctor. He was going to be a doctor, and I think that when he lost his 2 brothers, he kind of, in a lot of ways, just sort of gave up. And he tells the story that, which I always think is very poignant and sad, that he was so lost that he had to start this college that he had enrolled in. And they asked, well, what do you want to take? And he just opened the book, and accounting was the first thing he saw, and he said accounting, because he was just sort of so checked out at that point. My dad was a stutterer, and it caused him a lot of anguish in his life. So in a lot of ways, I think that part of who I am is in response to my father. He was the sweetest guy in the world, by the way. Lovely, lovely man, and I really loved him. But it was tough. His life was tough. My mom was a ball buster. She went out in the world, and she was strong, and she kind of got what she wanted. And by the way, they were very loving parents. And so I'm not one of those I'm the opposite of those. I think there are always two camps of people who grow up to be comedy writers, and one are the neglected, and I need to earn my parents' attention, and the other one is the smothered children, and that's me. They were very loving and supportive and filled me with confidence. You can do anything. Why not? You can do that. You can do that. And they always made me feel like whatever I was doing was special, even when it clearly wasn't.
Did you feel that way too?
I always, for the most part, I always just tried things. I was never fearful of, well, what if I can't do it? I think I always start things with the assumption of, well, I can do that. And so that definitely has served me well in life, because I think that's half the battle. And when I see in other people the fear of failure stopping them from trying things, I really feel for them. And I sometimes get a little frustrated at that because I can't understand it, but I'm sympathetic. And I didn't have that. I just had a natural, yeah, let's try it. That seems like something I could do, or I could learn it, and why not? So I think that came, from my parents just being very supportive.
And you mentioned that you started to get interested in theater in high school.
Mm-hmm.
What brought that on for you? Do you remember the moment?
I don't remember the moment, but I just remember being drawn to performing. And at first, I don't know if it was, I guess, oh, wouldn't it be fun to be on stage and make people laugh? Or it was probably a little bit of a, people will like you if, that kind of thing. But, it just seemed fun. When I got into theater, I immediately liked weird theater people. They were freer, and they didn't care as much about what people thought of them as the more popular kids. And I was a kid who rode a lot of different groups. I really moved around in a lot of different groups. I could hang with the jocks and the popular kids and all that, and that was fine. But I liked the theater group because there was just a freedom. They expressed themselves. They were weirder. They were more creative. We were more creative together. We weren't just sitting around talking about that girl's this or that guy's that. We were doing bits from Monty Python, and we were having, a lot of fun. And, I fit into some other groups too that I probably shouldn't have fit into. But I don't know, there was an immediate draw. The teachers were involved in that. I was very lucky. I went to an amazing high school, Glenbrook South High School, in Glenview, Illinois. We had moved at that point. And the theater department was incredible, and the teachers were quirky and fun, and they were the kind of teachers you wanted to hang out with. So it was just a wonderful experience.
Were you really interested in the performing aspect, or was it more about...
At first it was performing. Well, it was two ways. I mean, I would do plays and musicals and variety shows and things like that where it was performing. And then I also would do these, I was involved in a small group of people who would write some of the things. We would do these, our high school would do these assemblies, like 2 or 3 a year, that were performance assemblies, basically. And we wrote them. And, there's another guy it was in my class in high school, Eric Gilliland, who was, we both went to the same high school, and he is a comedy writer now, and has gone on and done, Roseanne and a number of other things. And, he was one of the guys that I was writing with back then. In fact, Eric, in my senior year of high school, Eric and I and my girlfriend at the time, Thalia Kalidimos, who was this girl, beautiful girl from a different high school. We did this. I got an internship at this local radio station. I mean, a really tiny little. I think it was involved, like it was attached to some church or something, and but it was radio, and I was doing a show for a couple hours a weekend, and Eric and I and my girlfriend, we started doing this. We turned it into a comedy show, with sketches, and it was pretty ambitious, and I'm sure terrible, but that was the beginning of what we're doing now.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
What'd you major in?
Technically I majored in communications, but along the way I started to get more and more interested in journalism, and while I didn't officially double major or minor, I don't think, maybe I did, I'm not sure. I ended up doing a lot in the journalism department, because by the time I was a senior, I was working at a local TV station doing news.
And that was on air?
Yeah.
You were on an anchor, or?
Well, what happened was I kept doing internships. I was a big believer in internships. They're the best. So I started at the local public radio station in Madison, producing radio dramas. They were still doing, kind of as a throwback, but they were doing these radio dramas, and I remember very clearly crashing a melon, because it had to be someone's skull getting cracked. So, but sound effects and I did a little. I think may have filled in on a couple voices, but it was actually professionally produced radio dramas with real actors and all that. And then I got an internship in the summer between my junior year and senior year at WLS TV, which is the ABC affiliate in Chicago, which was huge. When I grew up in Chicago, the local news was gigantic, as I remember, and the local newscasters were stars. And Chicago always had a very vibrant political story to tell, so it was interesting. I remember Walter Jacobson, always doing these commentaries where he would bust these aldermen for bribes and this, and it was really compelling stuff. But anyway, these local newsmen and women were stars in our town. So I got an internship at Channel 7, where many of my childhood idols were working, and just being like a newsroom gopher kind of a guy. But I got to go out in stories and sit with the reporters, and I very, very distinctly remember one reporter who I always thought was really great, and he was kind of a studly guy. His name was Chuck Gowdy, and he was just super good looking and really good on camera. And I just remember him telling me, "Don't do it. Go into sales. They make so much more money. Their lives are so much better. Don't do it." But of course, at that age, you don't listen. So I parlayed that internship into, when I got back to Madison for my senior year, into an internship at the local NBC affiliate, where I was just going to be, writing news for the show and, doing phone work and whatever else interns do. But I started hounding them I started making little tapes. When I'd go out on a story to cover an event where it was just going to be a voiceover and I'd write the copy, I'd shoot a quick stand-up and, show it to the news director. I was that pain in the ass kid. And eventually I just wore them down, I think. They really think, or somebody didn't show up one night or something, and they decided to air something, or they gave me an assignment, and suddenly I was on the air. And and then as it turned out that I was at the same time taking a class, one of the journalism classes I was taking that year was taught by the 10 o'clock anchor. So by day, I'd be in his class, and people would be asking questions. He'd be doing this, and then by night he would be saying, "Let's go live to Steve Levitan out in so and so." And it was sort of a very strange double life, because I was also, I was in a frat, and we had a very active social life and party scene. I'd come home from doing the 10 o'clock news at about 10:45 or so, and there'd just be a gigantic college party in full swing, and I'm walking in my suit, and I'd have to go upstairs and change and kind of like switch back into being a drunken idiot college student.
Were you a quasi-celebrity at that point?
No, because how many college kids watch the news, really? But it was really pretty, small time and all that. But especially back then, Madison has grown quite a bit. But it was a great experience, And then I stayed, when I graduated, I stayed for about a year and a half or 2 years. I actually switched over to the ABC affiliate and kept working. And that was an amazing time for a lot of reasons. But, that's a job where you meet the weirdest, most interesting, quirkiest people every day. And you wake up and you don't know what you're going to do that day. You don't know if you're going to be sitting in a boring public hearing at City Hall, or if you're going to be talking to a murderer, or if you're going to be chasing a tornado, or covering some sort of, tragic, life-altering event that day, and you never knew. But it forced a lot of good things that I think still serves me well today.
Like what?
Well, you're learning storytelling very quickly. What's interesting? What's the heart of this story? You're learning to tell stories visually, if you're good. And you're filling, as a writer now, you're filling your head with life experiences and with characters. That's the most important thing, really, at the end of the day. Once you become a writer, like we are now, and you're working on a show, you're taking from your brain. You're sucking things out at that point. You're looking for anything that feels real to you or interesting to you. At that time, all you're doing is filling your brain with characters and situations and feelings and fears and drama and funny moments and moments of growth. And all of that was incredibly fertile for what I'm doing now, I think.
Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it for a while. There was an aspect of it that I really enjoyed. It was the excitement of it. There was a lot of growth. First of all, I don't think I was very good at it. I always tell the story of a good friend of mine. I got a good friend of mine an internship at the station after I had started. And he was in my fraternity as well, and he wanted to do that too. So I got him an internship. And he came in, and I thought to myself, because I heard him cut something, fairly early on, like within the first week or two. He did like I was doing, sort of a, hey, what about me? And he was so much better than I was. He was smooth, and he had this voice at the time that was just very resonant, and I went, this guy is way better than I am at this. And I thought to myself, if the first guy I bring in is better than me, what chance do I have in this career? But ultimately, I didn't like a few aspects of it. I didn't like the fact that I had to be, well, I didn't like the fact that I had to be intrusive, often had to be intrusive into people's lives. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm very much a person that feels like, if you don't want me here, thank you, I'm gone, I'm sorry. And there were times when I was put in situations where I had to approach people who were in moments of grief, and that made me very uncomfortable. Specifically, I remember a moment where this was after about a year and a half. We got called because there was a drowning at a river in Wisconsin, and some kids were jumping off some pier or bridge or something, and one of them never came back up. And we got there, and I saw a friend of mine from that friend who had gone. By the way, he's still working in news. He's a big anchorman in Pittsburgh, my friend who was better than me. But he was now working for a different station, and so I got there, and we arrived. My cameraman was there, and as you do, you kind of go, "What's going on?" You get get initial sense, and they're saying they're still looking for the body, and da da da. And so we're sitting around, and we, as you would, you start at a moment there. If you find a you're going, "Oh, by the way, did you hear about so and so?" And suddenly, before you know it, you're maybe joking about something, and then the family who had been called to the scene arrived. The mom arrived, and she saw the rest of her family standing there, and she started screaming and shaking and crying because her son was missing. And my first instinct was, "Where's my photographer? Get this." That was my first instinct. And I hated that feeling so much. I got home that night and I gotta quit.
How long after that was it that you actually quit?
Like a week. It just wasn't me. That's not who I am. And I think that there was a part of me that got into it because I thought that there was like a thrill, because to me it was show business in a weird way. When you're a kid in Chicago, the local news is show business, and it's not the right reason to be in that. There were times I thought I did, good work, and I was a serious journalist, and I took it seriously and all that, but my heart wasn't into finding the truth. I remember thinking to myself, if I do this, I'm spending a lifetime covering what other people do, as opposed to doing something myself. So I just quit.
Did you have any idea what you wanted to do?
Well, again, it's funny because this didn't seem real. So I moved back to Chicago. My college girlfriend who I was still dating at the time, was living back there, and I wanted to be. Chicago was a big city. Madison was a fairly small, or relatively small town compared to Chicago, and I was 23 or 4 or whatever I was, and I wanted to be in a big city. So I moved back to Chicago, and I took a job at Leo Burnett. Well, first a very small ad agency for about maybe 9 months or so, and then to Leo Burnett, which was a gigantic ad agency. And that was, again, sort of the local version of what I'm doing now, in a lot of ways. It was, if you're a creative guy, funny guy, and you want to be a writer, and you live in Chicago, you're probably a copywriter at an ad agency. And there were a million guys who were hilarious and funny, and I loved it. I loved it. I was very happy at Leo Burnett.
What kind of accounts were you working on?
Miller Beer, McDonald's, Pillsbury. I worked with the Doughboy. And pitched in on some other big ones. But it was a creative atmosphere. And especially coming from news, it was filled with young people. Our agency, our office had 2,200 people in it. It was the largest single advertising office in the world. And it was vibrant, and it was fun, and it was at a time I got very lucky. I was there when Leo Burnett peaked, I think, at least creatively. It went from being this sort of old, sort of serious shop that was kind of considered a bit, while a major player and doing incredible things, it was kind of considered old-fashioned for a while because they called them critters. Every campaign had a character, the Pillsbury Doughboy, the Marlboro Man, Tony the Tiger, you name it. It seemed like every one. And it kind of got a reputation for that's what that agency is, and it wasn't as creatively vibrant as some of the big ones of the day, Fallon McElligott out of Minneapolis and BBDO and certain other ones, Shia Day out here. But then all of a sudden they got a new creative director, and it became more vibrant, and we started winning awards, Clios and awards at Cannes and all that, and it was an exciting time. Everybody was riding high, and I loved it. I really did. I look back on that time very, very fondly. Those were my, basically, I look at those years as my sort of fun, wild, single years.
Do you have a favorite ad that you wrote at that time?
Well, I did. I wrote. Like a favorite commercial or I don't know. It's funny. I remember I did a really nice McDonald's Halloween commercial that I thought played very well. I did an enormous amount of work with music. I became the go-to. I worked on this account for a long time, called Light Genuine Draft, which was a test market beer from Miller. So it never even made it out of test markets, but there is in 4 or 5 markets. But it needed full-on creative. They were deciding between Genuine Draft Light and Light Genuine Draft, and they had 2 completely different approaches, and that's the world of beer. And anyway, I did an enormous amount of work on that. A number of campaigns, a number of TV commercials, and I can't tell you how many radio commercials with big bands, and I'd write songs and lyrics to songs, and then we'd turn them into, I'd get a great band that I was into, and I'd get them to record it, and I was having fun. And so that was great. Did a number of, really fun spots. And at the time I did Second City, got involved in Second City a little bit. I just did the Players Workshop, which was just sort of like improv classes, really. But, it was just a really good time for me. But what happened was, when I was doing news, it started for me where I started to be in the newsroom. I remember very, very specifically being in a newsroom and looking up, and we had the 3 monitors on the wall at the time because there were only 3 networks. I'm old. And at night when I was working on the 10 o'clock news, we'd have to work on our stories, from between 6 and 10. So for part of that time, you're back in the newsroom writing it up and voicing it over and editing and whatever. But on the monitors are what's going on in prime time. And those were the sitcoms. And I remember at one point just looking up and, maybe just turning it up for a second and going, I think I could do that. I think, again, that goes back to that, I could do that. So without having any clue why I was doing it or what I was doing, I decided to just, let me try to write a script, in my off time. And I began that. I wrote, I think the first one I tried, it was either it was either an episode of Moonlighting, or it was an episode of Sledgehammer, which was a show back then that I always thought was funny. And I don't know which one came first, but I just said, let me try to write it. So during the day, or before I started work, or at night or on weekends, I just sat down at my typewriter and started banging out a script. And then I would finish it, which still is kind of remarkable to me that I finished it. I look back at my life, when I was a kid, and there was a pattern of things I didn't follow through on. I took lessons in just about every instrument, and started a lot of things that I didn't finish, but I finished it. And I kept going. I did I'll do another one. This time I'll do that show, but I didn't know anybody in the business. I didn't know what to do with it. It didn't seem real to me. So what are you going to do? Put it in the drawer, and I'll start another one. That was kind of fun. Let me do it again. So then I moved to Chicago, and I come out here. I sell a commercial, an idea for the commercial. When you do that, the writer goes out and produces the commercial. So I'd come out here for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and it was the first time I'd been out here since I'd been a kid. And suddenly, you're starting to meet people. You're starting to see studios, and it's actually becoming real. That thing that was that seemed so fantastical and so far away suddenly became something you can put your hands on. And it was at that point, and maybe even after meeting somebody in the business, where you talk to somebody and you go, oh, I work on that show. You're like, okay, wait, you're a human being, and you're working on that show, and I'm a human being, so I could be working on that show. I mean, that's kind of what happened to me. It needed to connect for me. And it's funny because nowadays, with the internet, I think people feel much more connected to they could talk to people on shows now, through Twitter and through Facebook or through fan sites and all that, and they get an amazing sense of what it's like behind the scenes, and they could put a face to the names on the credits. We didn't have any of that. So it becoming real was meaningful to me. And I decided, well, I'm going to try to do this. So that took a while. I worked at Leo Burnett for about, I don't know, maybe 2 years, I think. And then, so whenever I come out here to shoot a commercial, I would try to make some connections. Read this, could you please read this, blah, 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 blah. And I wrote another script. So I wrote this Wonder Years episode that keeps showing up on my bio that I worked on Wonder Years, but I never did. And but I wrote an episode, and I thought it was, actually what happened was, I was so fired up by coming out to LA. I remember I got home on a Saturday night, and I went into my office on Sunday morning. I sat down at the computer, and when I left Sunday night, I had a script. I wrote a full episode of Wonder Years in a day, because I was just like driven at that point. And it's kind of remarkable to me that even a bad script in a day is good. But then I saw that this guy named Michael Dinner was coming to speak in Chicago. So now it was about, how can I make connections? How can I do this? He's coming to speak in Chicago. He was one of the producer-directors of Wonder Years. So I did that thing, went to his panel, heard him, blah, blah, blah. Went to him afterwards, and I said, hi. And again, I'm not good at this. I'm good at pursuing if I want to do something and it involves me doing something, that's fine. When it involves me selling or, crossing someone's space, I'm not good at it. But I said, hi, I'm so-and-so, I've written a script. Would you possibly read it for me? And he took it, which was very nice. And he got back to me fairly quickly and said, the bad news is we just did a very similar story that hasn't aired yet on Wonder Years. We can't use your script because it's too similar. The good news is I thought yours was better. And he said, I'll pass it on to my agent or somebody. So I got a call soon thereafter. I get home and on my answering machine is a call from an agent. So-and-so, would love to see what you got. And I thought, I'm hired, I'm in, And basically that person had called, do you have anything else? And I didn't feel like I had anything else that was as good as that. And I said, yeah, I do. I got a Cheers. And they go, well, send it to me. And I said, I'll do that right away. And then I hung up the phone. I go, I have to write a Cheers. And so I sat down and I just started, as quickly as I could, banging out this Cheers episode. And I sent it, and that agent fizzled away, as is the case, and as I have since learned happens often. We love you, we want you, and then they're gone. But I took that and I sent it to, eventually sent it to people, and someone finally said to me, listen, if you want to be in this business, you got to live in LA. You got to be out here. You got to be meeting people. You got to be able to come on a meeting like this. So to make this very long story just a touch shorter, I took a job with Disney doing trailers, marketing trailers, making and editing and trailers and TV and radio commercials for Touchstone and Disney movies. It was a way to move. They moved me out. They paid for the moving company. They put me up in an apartment for 2 months or something like that. And it basically meant I didn't have to wait tables. And from there, and that was a job that I really didn't like. And but from there, I started meeting people and getting things around, met someone, gave a script to an agent, or to an executive who gave it to an agent, got around, and finally it landed, I got an agent off it, and it landed in the right pile, and off I went.
Talk about that. What was that first writing job?
So what happened was that through my first agent, that script landed in a pile at the show Wings. And the script was the Cheers script that I had to come up with quickly. And two of the writers who were like lower level writers at Wings, that was their job to go through the pile, and because back we got to give a freelance episode to somebody. So they said, this is a pretty funny script, we'll have this kid in. That was Bill Diamond and Mike Saltzman, who are two still friends of mine to this day. And thank you, Bill and Mike. And they so I went in and I pitched to Wings. It was sort of in its, I think it had already done a season of 7. It was now in its second season.
Was this your first pitch ever? No.
My first pitch was to, I forgot about that, was to, I think it was for the show Rock, I believe, and I was terrible. I thought, again, in my way of not wanting to be too pushy, that they read my script, they said it was funny, so I thought just go in and kind of be a nice guy. And the feedback I got was, he seems kind of quiet. And I was so not quiet, but I just thought the script sells it at that point. But really what I didn't realize, it was kind of silly, is no, they want to see if you're funny and if you're lively and if you're smart and all that in a room. So so then the next pitch was for Wings. So I went in and I was very prepared, and they liked there was one nugget of one story that they really liked, and so they said I had to walk in and pitch to Peter Casey, David Angel, and David Lee, and probably a couple of other Dave Hackle and a couple other big scary people at the time. Maybe Chris Lloyd might have been in that room when I first pitched, because he was working on the show then. And they liked it. They liked, you know, you go in and you pitch. They go, great, you know, we like that. Let us get back to you. Okay. So now I hear back from them, and they say, come on in. We liked that story. Let's come in and see if we can work it out. And we went in and we sat in. I sat in down in David Angel's office with them, and we started talking about the story. And very soon the place goes just dead quiet, and it just kind of loses any momentum we had. And I'm sitting around and I'm like, oh, this is not going well. This is not going well. Well, what I came to know later on was that it happened all the time there, that it was a very quiet, thinky place. A lot of rooms are, you know, people screaming. This was like all right, let's think about that for a while. And that was that process. But I came out of there with beats of a story. I wrote it, very excited. When I came back to turn in the script, they said it was on a Friday or something. They said, you know, we're shooting our show the following Tuesday. Hope I'm getting my days right. The season premiere. Do you want to come and sit in the audience? Because I'd never been to a taping before, and I said, yeah, of course, thank you. And I was really excited. So I was now living with my girlfriend from Chicago, different one from the college one. I met my wife, Krista, back when we were doing advertising, and then she moved out. At this point, we weren't married, but she moved out, and we were living together. And I came home, and I was really excited. Like, they invited me to come sit there in the audience. And over the course of the weekend, it dawned on me that they invited me before they read my script. And I'm like, what if they don't like the script? And they don't, you know, this could be a disaster. And I started getting really nervous about it. I show up, and there's a seat for me in the front row of the bleachers and the whole thing. And I was terrified. Not of me, but I was so excited. I couldn't believe that there was a set for a show. And I could not believe. My heart was pounding. I could feel it in my neck. That these actors were to walk out and perform right here, and it's going to be on TV. It was almost overwhelming to me. And but the whole time I'm like, I could see people kind of like waving to me. I'm like, I don't think they liked it. I don't think they liked it. I'm like, you know, I'm really not fully enjoying the experience because I'm going, this is, you know, and occasionally someone would go by and go, hey, nice job, you know, and I'd go, that didn't seem real. That seemed polite, you know. And 3.5 hours of this, whatever, show ends, and David Angel says, hey, Steve, you want to come down to the stage and, you know, see the set? And sure. So I walked down. He said, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, oh, no, this doesn't feel good. And he walked over and he said, I just want to tell you, we all thought you did a great job on the script, and we'd like you to join our staff. You know.
Wow.
So that that's a big moment. So that was a good day.
How are you feeling? I mean, that's very, very rare.
What do you think especially for it to happen in such dramatic fashion. It's almost like a scene from a movie that it happened on the set of a show and all that. It was incredible. And it took a while for that to sink in. But in the meantime, I had been working at Disney, and long story short, they wanted me to sign this long-term contract, and I didn't want to sign it because I said, listen, I told my boss, this isn't really what I want to do. I really want to go write this. And he said, well, we can't have you work here anymore without signing this employment contract. He said, well, what if we make you freelance instead of, and then you can keep working here until you find something else, and then just bill us per job. So I said, fine. If you want, I go, I'm fine just keeping it the way it is, but if you want to do that, that's fine. And so then I went to one of our vendors, one of the companies that did what I was doing, making trailers, TV commercials. I said, okay, how much do you charge for a commercial? How much do you charge for a trailer, for this, for that? And he told me, and my jaw dropped. I instantly tripled my salary in no time. Overnight, I tripled my salary and worked half as many hours. So I had the greatest gig in the world. And so when I got offered this job to go work as a staff writer on Wings, I was actually taking a pay cut. Because, I had a great thing going. I didn't think twice about it. I did it. But it was a funny little bit of a transition. And I joined the staff. The interesting part of that story, I hope, is that the little germ of the idea that they grabbed onto when I went to pitch, finally the day came for that table read of my script, my first table read, that part of the story tanked. It didn't work at all. It did not work at all. And and we had to completely throw it out and do something different. But, that's life.
What was the first script that was produced for you?
That was that.
Was that?
That was that one.
Remember the title of it?
No. I should know that. Somewhere I have a picture of, that my wife took of the TV screen with my name on it and, that whole thing. But in that episode, Thomas Hayden Church, I always thought he had a great voice. I said, well, what if he basically gets a job at the local station or something involved him starting walking around talking like a DJ all the time because he's got such a great voice. Well, it turns out that's not so funny if you have a great DJ voice. And so it really didn't play. But fortunately, I was on my way at that point.
And talk a little bit about when you first got into that writing room. What was it like?
Well, that was ridiculous because there were legends in that room. David Lloyd, was in that room a couple days a week. Levitan and Isaacs, who had worked on, MASH and Cheers. Cheers was my, favorite show. And they had worked on that. And, of course, Casey Angel Lee had worked on Cheers. So suddenly I'm in a room with them all. And it's just sponge time. It's overwhelming. It's terrifying. You can't get out of your own head. Like, what, do I say this? Do I not say this? Is this funny? It's very hard to be funny when you're worried, when you're working like this. I try to keep that in mind as I hire and fire people, unfortunately, but that you got to give people time to relax and feel comfortable before they can do their best work. But it was an amazing learning experience. I mean, I remember very specifically having like these moments where, oh my God, that is brilliant, how that worked. I remember when someone explained the concept to me of hiding exposition in a joke. We have to know, for this bit to work later on, we have to know that he's afraid of spiders. So if you say in the beginning of the show, well, of course you're afraid of spiders, so, that that's going to pay off somewhere along the way, so it's not surprising and it's not very artful. But if in the beginning of the show, that character makes a joke about his fear of spiders, and it feels to the audience like the only reason he's saying that is because it's a funny joke, and it feels like, oh, that was just funny, and it's a quirky little character moment, but it was funny, people won't know. And I just remember going, that is brilliant. Wow. Basic concepts that blew my mind. So I was the luckiest guy in the world because I was in a room with some of the most talented people in the business. I got so lucky. I'm so lucky. Your first job, to be put in a room with people who were good at what they did, who cared about what they did, who had learned from a lineage that went back to Jack Parr, in that room. I mean, people they took forward, they took with them the best of those, the way things were done, and I learned a functioning system. There were at the time and to this day, there are very dysfunctional shows. but I learned how to run a show well, how to keep it all moving, while learning the art and craft of writing. I was also learning how to run a show from people who did it well. So I was the luckiest guy in the world to be in that room.
Did you feel like you belonged?
Not for there's a lot of self-doubt. And I remember pitching, I remember the first joke. The first joke I pitched, the first thing I pitched there, people went, wow, that is really good. Like, I remember that moment. Like, it was a smart joke, and people went, that's a good joke. But I don't think my scripts were very good that first year, because when it came time to pick me up for season 2, they weren't sure they were going to pick me up. And what happened was, during that first year, there was one night where we came back and a story had fallen apart, and it involved somehow there was a digging of a hot tub that I don't remember what it was exactly, but it involved one of the characters. They were doing a hot tub at one of the characters' houses, and something happened. Anyway, it fell apart. But it's kind of funny. So we needed a whole new take on it to work, and it was not good. But they had spent a lot of money on this set, because you can't dig into these floors. So they had to build this giant raised set, and they had to bring in a ton of dirt. And there on the stage was a lot of money in this set to build a hot tub and to dig a hole. So basically it was like, okay, we got a hole in the ground. What are we going to do? And, fortunately for me, at some point after, we're all, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I pitched this very, very from left field idea that at first they went, yeah, that's weird. And then after about 10 minutes, one of the showrunners said, wait a minute. I remember David Lee goes, wait a minute. That will work. Then we could do this and we can do that. And that's a good idea. We should do that. And we did, and it turned out to be, I think, very funny or something, because when I got a call from the guys, Casey Angel Lee, for second season, they called me, and I was like waiting to hear if I was picked up or not. And they said, we're going to be honest with you. It was a close call, because your scripts were just okay. And if you hadn't come up with that one fix, I'm not sure you would have made it. But we're going to give you another chance, and we want you to build on what you did. And there was something about it, while that wasn't the biggest vote of confidence in the world, they wanted me back, and that gave me enough confidence where the next season I started doing well. And I definitely earned my place from that point on.
Stop there to change.